Okay, so in today's world, I think it's probably fair to say that authentication or stroke IT access security, it's never been more important because of the way the world's so connected, but it's also probably never been more complex. So just your thoughts, I suppose, as to how we've arrived at today's somewhat unsatisfactory situation, shall we say?
I'm not quite sure, actually, how to answer that question, because we clearly haven't got it right. We have things like biometrics, and we have made various attempts to produce one-time passcodes. If you remember back to about 1977, when security company FRSA kind of created the first key fob devices with a little 6-digit readout in the side. It was realized fairly early on. I think a computer scientist in California in the 60s thought we can use passwords, and then it was realized that actually computers are very good at cracking their own passwords. So people thought, okay, well, let's have a one-time code, and that will be our answer. But we've never got the delivery system right, partly because everything that was produced was based on stealable elements. Obviously, from the word go, the password itself is stealable because that's a fixed thing. So one-time codes would be effectively a passcode that changed every time. So we had the RSA, I think they were called Secure ID key fobs. Then that morphed into phone apps. And then it was thought, okay, well, let's make the phone even more tied in with the user and the authentication. So let's create the authenticator app on the phone. The problem with that particular device, which Google started in 2011, I think, so it's 13 years old now, which is quite a long time. Microsoft then imitated in 2015, was it? But the upshot is that actually the majority of people don't like it. Somebody from Google, a techie from their camp, confessed at a conference in 2018 that only 10% of all Google apps were using Authenticator. So, and even my home techie says, I just hate it. Every time it says, pick up your phone, it's either downstairs in the car, it's just an extra faff. So Authenticator, okay, I know some people quite like it, but we set to, as a little team, to try and create a better way of giving people one-time codes. And it was at an event I was at in Bletchley Park a year or so back. Gordon, send a check in the post, please. This terrific book by Gordon Craymer, the BBC security correspondent, and it mentions this thing called the Anderson Report, which was written by the USAF in 1972, and as he says, it is an actual how-to guide for hackers, and this was written in 1972, and because of that, the NSA, the National Security Agency, working with the USAF, said, you can't put this out, it's too controversial. It will upset a lot of people about computer security, it'll worry people. We're going to classify this. And the USAF said, well, good luck with that. We've already sent out 300 copies. So the USAF's Anderson Report, recommend looking it up. It's online. And it was basically, as Craymer says, the blueprint. The appendix is just a list of exploits, which hackers and cybersecurity firms still quote today as though they've just invented it. things like man in the middle, it's all there. The shocking thing is, what on earth have we done in 52 years to sort it out? If we knew all the problems in 72, anyway, so we thought we'd try and create something that was in your head, a mentally held secret. The password with a mentally held secret is very good because of the mentally held bit. Our brains are pretty good things to have in the authentication mix. The problem with the password, of course, being fixed, you could intercept it or phish it or steal it somehow. And once it was out there, of course, a hacker could use it. And it's still one of the, well, according to Verizon, it's about 75 to 80% of all hacking attacks happen because of password compromise. Anyway, winding on, we thought, let's try and create a mentally held secret rather than scrapping the whole idea of having something in your head, which could work better than a fixed password because it gives you a different code every time. And therefore, it's a better way of delivering one-time codes.
Okay, and in terms of the so everything, I won't say everything that's sort of between you reference of 97 and today, but I mean there've been so many attempts, sort of two-factor authentication, multi-factor. You mentioned biometrics, so you're in essence saying that no kind of combination of those gives you as good a security as is possible or is desirable. Is that a reasonable sort of assessment?
Okay, well, one thing that shocks a lot of people is that everything we use currently for authentication is based on a stealable element. Everything we use for authentication is stealable. And if you think of biometrics, you can get fingerprints off drinking glasses, for instance. I love saying to people in cafes at security conferences, have you wiped your cup or glass? It even got into one of the TV series of Line of Duty. You can take fingerprints off people, off objects. You can photograph irises at a distance. That was even in Minority Report. And biometrics good, not to decry what they've done, but they are based on these stealable elements of usually voice, face, fingerprints. And they're never 100% accurate. So it's usually a kind of a best guess by the biometric system, and it will say this is 97%. It's never 100%. So yeah, they can work. Sometimes they just don't work at all. Several people I know don't have fingerprints that work. That's another thing. A lot of pregnant women apparently don't have viable fingerprints. So maybe another ingredient, and we think that our system could be an ingredient. So it could be the primary authenticator, but we're not trying to disrupt the biometric market. We're just trying to add to it. So yes, and okay, I'll tell you the real sin that the authentication market has committed. In, I think it was 2015, the NSA, again, they seem very busy, said don't use SMS one-time codes because it's so easy to take over somebody's mobile account with what's called SIM swapping. You go to a mobile shop and say, broken my phone, can you give me another SIM? The number is this, stick it in somebody else's phone, and your phone account has been taken over. So security codes sent to a mobile number aren't really that secure, and yet it's really become flavor of the decade with things like strong customer authentication. We think that the tech world can do much better than that. So codes by SMS or email, also insecure, and codes by authenticator on a platform that an awful lot of people don't like, and a lot of people find is too complex. It's not a mass use solution. So we're not actually doing terribly well. So we thought if we can actually come up with a better way of doing one-time codes delivered on the screen of whatever device you're using. You actually get the equivalent of a password, which has changed every time, but it's actually giving you the equivalent of 2FA, two-factor. I know a lot of purists will say, well, you should have a second device. Well, actually, that's rubbish, because an awful lot of people, for instance, do their banking on their phone, and they're getting a one-time code on the phone. So there's no separate device there. Anyway, so that's where we've got to, and I think that the world just keeps stirring the same old ingredients round and round. And that's why we at Shayype Solutions think that we've got something very useful.
Yeah. So what is it that you've developed to address some of the issues you've discussed, at least add to the mix, and whether, as you say, it's the primary means or it's one of a multi-factor authentication solution, I guess. But what is it that you've done?
Okay, well, we've simply hidden a one-time code in a little grid of squares. Here's a pattern on, I mean, normally this would work on any device, but that's a grid which will have numbers on it. And that pattern, which you can see in yellow, is actually in your head. So it's actually invisible when you use it. That's just an illustration to put over the point. There's a secret pattern. The pattern stays the same, but the numbers change. So the numbers switch around using the same pattern every time, which the hacker does not know about, gives you a one-time code. So one time it might be 543215. Next time it'll be 123453, for the sake of argument. So you get a different code every time, but on the screen of whatever you're using, could be a phone, PC, tablet, whatever, or ATM, door lock, you get a one-time code, and nobody can see the pattern that you're looking at because it's in your head. And we have patents on that in Europe, the US. We have a GB patent, but that's part of the European one. And that's how it worked.
Okay, I guess that an obvious question would be, as with password, people forget these things. So if you happen to have a brainstorm or whatever and forget the exact pattern that you've chosen, how is that situation addressed, I guess?
We would suggest that you don't have a simple reset password type system. We would prefer administrators to insist that the user is re-authenticated pretty thoroughly. Actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because the reset password thing, in my humble opinion, is part of the whole problem. A lot of people are lazy. They go, oh, I can just say I forgot password and I'll reset it. And actually, that is a great tool for hackers. Once they can get in with a password, possibly a stolen password, then they can change the password and lock you out. So we'd suggest that you set up your pattern all over again, and that whatever organization it is checks you out pretty thoroughly. So you can't just pretend to be you. You have to be you.
And in terms of this, and would you recommend it being used as a standalone, or would you suggest it be part of either two-factor or even a multi-factor authentication, and an extra tool just to make sure, or as sure as you can be, that the person is being correctly authenticated?
All of the above. I mean, we've no idea exactly what the world will want to do with this. It could, for instance, have an ordinary password as well. So for typical login, you'd put in your username, say an email. You could have a password at that point. For systems migrating over to this, they might find it easier to do that. but we think it's probably suitable just to use a shape code instead of a password. But it will be an ingredient which we welcome developers using in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, I was going to ask, I mean, you must have considered the sort of integration possibilities for Shape. So how do you envisage it? You know, how much potential do you think it has?
Huge. I mean, in our view, it's something that the world, that every connected citizen on the planet, there are probably about 5.5 billion of us, actually deserves a better way to prove who we are. Let me give you an example, Phil. If you're traveling or you're needing to get help somewhere and everything has been stolen or broken, your mobile phone, passport, driver's license, everything's gone and missing, you're on a trip and you need to call a bank or travel company or whatever. How do you prove who you are from scratch? So think about it. You've got no phone, biometric reader. Passwords are obviously completely useless. You're not going to, there's nothing you can log into. You just have to prove who you are. And if you could go to a terminal, so somebody could have one of our grids texted to their phone, or if you're on a phone in the middle of the Sahara Desert, you could at least write 35 numbers. Typically our grid is 5x7 as a workaday, works well on the screen of a mobile. Just write down the numbers and then answer back with a code, and they can go, "Hi Phil, we know it's you." Another great use of this, and this is where MSP Channel Insights could really help us and the world. We are very keen to help with things like child protection, mobile banking, etc., etc. In terms of child protection, and there's also been a lot of stuff in the news recently about children, underage people saying to Meta and others are available, yes, of course I'm old enough, because they want to get the content. And there doesn't seem to be very good ways of proving their age. Now, say you'd got identity partners, which could be big data companies, banks, whatever, they could then enable you to say, I'm Phil, and my identity partner, Experian, Equifax, Verizon, the post office, whoever it happens to be. We used to have identity partners in terms of our digital verify system provided by the government. I'm not quite sure how that's been replaced, but that principle would enable you to go, right, my identification partner is, let's say, Experian, and they will verify instantly that I am me if I produce a one-time code which accords with my account. And then Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever, could go, yes, we can see you're old enough. Yes, you can enter this site. Otherwise, they'd lock you out.
And one other thing occurs to me, and if it's a silly question, apologies, but everyone's talking about the post-quantum world as well, where, as I understand it, the sort of current security rules kind of go out the window because of the power of these computers. Does what happens? Does everything have to be rewritten when that happens, or is what you're doing sort of safe from that? Just your thoughts as to, you know, if everything will get completely turned upside down or not.
No, because actually, if you have a completely one-time code, that can't be cracked by a quantum computer. It can't guess what's in your head. If it was a fixed password or passphrase, I mean, that's always something fixed. And by the way, it always amuses me about people who go on about passphrases because they're longer. Have they not heard of keyloggers or viruses, Trojans, which can pick up everything you type? No, if you've got a quantum computer, it can't crack a one-time code. because it's instantly created using your brain. So no, AI is a real threat to all of us. And I'd particularly like to mention things like, certainly in terms of MSPs, what's called CEO fraud, which has really become a problem. I looked up before we did this interview that between 2016 and 2019, it was estimated that there was something like $26 billion of CEO fraud. And I bet it's many times worse than that now. Somebody is sitting in an office and they get an email saying, "Hi, it's the managing director." And it looks like the managing director because it's got the sort of things that the managing director would talk about. Maybe there's even a voice note with what sounds like the managing director's voice, and it isn't. And it's saying, "Please pay this invoice." Actually, there's a company in Peterborough which had this very thing happen. There was somebody in the account sitting across from the managing director and didn't want to query an email and paid £20,000. And AI is going to make that sort of thing even worse. I mean, it'll just trawl through your social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever, and then email somebody and say, "Hi, saw you at the barbecue last weekend. It all sounds very familiar," and so on. The sort of thing that the C-level person would only know, but because it's been gleaned by a computer.
I'm wondering as well, is part of the problem that, I mean, for example, I'm sure other governments, but I mean, the current government always tells us that the crime statistics are going down, although the little asterisk says if you exclude cybercrime, which is, going up. Do you think part of the problem is it's not being, as with that example, it's not being treated seriously enough? It's almost sort of like, well, it's going to happen, and the victimless crime kind of thing. So the attention that it deserves is not being given by everyone, and we need a mind change to help address it, and then solutions such as yourselves will get pride of place in that. Is it all, I say, well, I'm not saying it's being trivialized, but it's perhaps just not being given the attention it deserves.
Yes, it's kind of crept up on us, really. So certainly things like the pandemic and increased home working or flexi working, but doing a lot of work, extra work we wouldn't have done before on the road or at a hot desk or something, makes being able to prove who you are very securely, and that doesn't mean necessarily using a key on a pass key on your device, because you might be on somebody else's device. By the way, our one-time code system you could use extremely securely in a web cafe. It could be the most infected computer on the planet. Doesn't make any difference, because it's the magic interaction between your brain and what you see on the screen, which even if it's passed on to somebody else, and instantly that code can't be used again. So even if it was instantaneously intercepted, it wouldn't make any difference. But to answer your question, Phil, yes, the tech world has been playing catch up on this. The impression I get is that the likes of Microsoft believe that everything is doable on your phone, but that also doesn't quite work, because these things get broken, stolen. A relative of mine dropped hers down the loo and it didn't work for 2 days. You just can't depend on a device. We really need something else. And talking of the problem being taken seriously, there was a news story just a few days ago from UK Finance saying that they thought the next government, and this is why it's becoming an election issue right now, it's quite hot stuff, that the next government, whoever it is, needs to take this incredibly seriously. I mean, you'll probably know of the kind of fraud called APP, and what is that? Authorized payment, whatever it is. I've forgotten the meaning of it. But it's horrible because it's often people's life savings, and it's big, and nobody's really taking it that seriously. So clearly, this is now becoming an issue that we can no longer ignore. So yeah, the governments have to take this seriously.
In terms of yourselves, where are you at, and what's the plan in terms of rolling out? You obviously mentioned, I'm assuming the channel has a role to play, but what's the roadmap? I guess is, yeah, that's what I'm asking.
We are hoping very shortly to build a better MVP. We did have one MVP, but it wasn't on a scalable platform. And we're working with a new technical partner. Once we've got our basic system in the cloud, that will be pluggable into anything using just a few lines of code. So for instance, somebody wants to put it into a door lock system. Door locks actually have only had biometrics and fixed pins for decades. So we get the impression that the door entry trade is crying out something new. But things like that, or websites, networks, work systems could just be plugged in using basically our MVP, but suited to various purposes. And we certainly think that the MSP sector, for things like remote monitoring and management, would be very well served by better and better authentication. There are push systems that work on phones that say, "Hi Phil, is this you trying to log in?" And you just press a button on the phone. One of the criticisms that I hear is it's too easy to go, "Oh, I'll just press my phone screen." I'm not really thinking about it. One advantage of our system is that it does give that slight extra level of engagement. But yeah, so certainly home working, being able to just prove who you are anywhere, anytime, vitally important.
And in terms of the feedback, I mean, I imagine you've talked to various folks, whether it's just your sort of peers at events or technical partners, potential, etc. Any feedback you can share as to people's reaction to what it is you're doing?
Generally, very good. I mean, an awful lot of people look to the tech world, the Apples, Googles, Microsofts, to provide leadership, but in my humble opinion, they've just not. Their view seems to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know what you think about this. They seem to be saying, "Well, we've provided all the security wherewithal. You guys are just not using it properly." What do you think about that? I mean, what is your view?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest worry is that at the moment, I guess most of the big organizations, whether it's the IT ones or the banks and stuff, are sort of relatively happy to allow us to make mistakes in inverted commas and recompenses. But I'm worried that at some stage in the future, some arbitrary time, they will, as you say just there, they will decide that they've given us all enough information and weapons to prevent the bad actors from getting us, and therefore if something does happen, they will turn around and say, "Nothing to do with us, you did something wrong." That, and I don't know when it'll happen, but I'm sure it will, because now I mean, I do phone banking, and they read me a whole list of things. Have I done this? How it is? They're clearly trying to make sure that I haven't done anything stupid, because then they can blame me if I have, kind of thing. So that's the direction of travel that worries me, if you like. So yeah.
Sure. I mean, I, like you, I'm sure, get several times a week some organization trying to verify me by sending me a one-time code. I would say that those organizations are almost being negligent. In fact, perhaps criminally negligent for a bank with something that's so important, to send out a one-time code to a mobile number. They're not actually sending it to my mobile because the number could have been taken over by somebody else. So they're just firing in the direction of a mobile number, a one-time code.
The explanation is they give you a a small window to use the code, isn't it? And I guess that's they're potentially trying to protect you or protect themselves. Say, well, you only had 10 minutes to use it, so.
But what difference does that make? Because a hacker would have, or even a machine-based system would simply enter that code back. And as far as the bank is concerned, or whoever it is, you look as though you've authenticated or been verified, to use their word, simply by responding with that code. But it doesn't.
I understand, but they send this 10-minute limit. I guess that's maybe just to give you the impression that they take security very seriously. But as you say,
sure,
if onto a phone and someone's used it, then that's it.
Have you come across the European Banking Directive called PSD2? I think
right.
we've got PSD3. I believe that's out, or maybe it's more than that. But PSD2 said all banks, including the UK, must have SCA, strong customer authentication. And it seems to me that the best way they can come up with is text or email or authenticator. But for the reasons we've discussed, those methods are insecure, and if everything is based on your phone, then you risk being locked out if you've no longer got the phone. I mean, another thing that happened with my phone, a lot of iPhones get it. You keep the phone in your pocket, bit of fluff builds up in the charging port. You plug it in overnight, and you pick it up in the morning. It's not charged. So your ability to authenticate yourself is delayed until you can get it charged. That's not good. So these aren't good solutions.
No, I have where I live, the mobile phone signal is pretty naff anyway. So you talk about those one-time codes. Often I have to sort of run around the garden trying to get before it actually comes onto my phone, and being aware that there's a 10-minute limit or whatever it is. So it's crazy.
Right. Yeah. Not good. Yes. So
I mean, maybe just to sort of summarize, if we were to have a conversation, which hopefully we'll say, I don't know, in 6 months' time or even further on, where would you hope to be? I guess in a few months' time or a year's time.
Okay, we've got some. We've had a lot of conversations with people who are interested in, let's say, we can call it authentication 2 or 3, and certainly part of Web 3. So we have interest from a global company with 500 million end users. We need to get our MVP in their hands. They want to put it into test in labs outside the UK, because that's where their labs are. So they seem very interested. We've also got a payslip distribution company. We just wanted 1 or 2 companies to prove that there is market interest. So we've got another one which has given us a letter of intent, and they dish out payslips to about 250,000 individuals. So we're hoping with 1 or both of those companies and others, we will find our solution or our ingredient. We're very clear that this is an ingredient. It will fit into anything that already exists. That's our way forward. And people like, sorry, the payroll company, for instance, has a police force, and there've been some horrendous headlines about payslip personal information leaking out. We've all got to do what we can to secure staff who look after us as part of their day-to-day work. And we simply can't, I mean, think about it, the whole database model, right? We need something centralized. We keep your data in it. There was this horrendous case in Finland recently of this hacker who hacked into a psychotherapy company and let all the patient's details out. He was trying to extort money. He's now in jail, fortunately. But the whole model, and there are all sorts of digests of data breaches, we just can't keep databases safe.
Enjoyed chatting to you, and I mean, the solution's fascinating, and your thoughts more generally as to where we are and what needs to be done. It's been interesting. So, Jonathan, really appreciate the time, and yes, it'd be good to follow up in a few months and see where you are. But at least for now, thanks very much. Appreciate your time.
Been a pleasure.